Hello and welcome to the MDC Talks. This is your boy Omari Motion Carter. We are the Motion Dance Collective specializing in the education, presentation and creation of dance on film practice. Anna Clifford is here, James Williams is here, and today we have a very, very special guest in the form of filmmaker Marlene Millar, who has created dance, documentary and experimental media production since 1989, y'all. Marlene is based up in Canada and is committed to supporting the creative practice of independent filmmaking, mentoring emerging artists, lecturing and teaching workshops across Canada and internationally. Thank you so much for joining us, Marlene. Welcome to the MDC Talks.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I just wish I could be there with you in person.
Yes.
I know, right? And actually, like, you're one of the screen dancers at the moment that I've had the pleasure of seeing quite the most, like recently with you coming over to the UK and doing some stuff and what we did in Ireland with navigation and stuff. So it's really nice to, although it's not in the flesh, it feels like it hasn't been too long.
That's right. Yeah. And just having had all of our connections at Screendance in Edinburgh and Scotland again, that was a really beautiful recall to last year when so many of us managed, quite sort of spontaneously to all converge there together. And it was a bit of a reunion, but there was still kind of that lingering sensation of having been all together with so many makers and presenters. It was really lovely.
Yes, happy memories for sure.
Yeah, so how we usually start our podcast is asking the question of what the term screen dance means to you. But I know I've spoken to you specifically about screen dance in Canada and how predominantly people say dance film as a term in general, or do you use the term screen dance yourself when you describe your work?
Sometimes, when I look back over proposals that I've been writing, I kind of fluctuate between dance film, because that's the practice I feel I come out of. Screen dance I find is a great way to describe the relationship or the result, the fact that it is going to be a screen-based work. And more I'm using dance media as a term.
Okay.
Just to because, we're moving into so many different forms of technology now. So the screen is disappearing a little bit, or how we interpret it might be different. If we're thinking of moving into working more with tech, working in VR, AR. So I'm sort of going to media as a way of describing that genre in a sense. For me, dance film, like I'm saying, I came out of a filmmaking practice, so the craft of filmmaking still resides in whatever I do, whether I'm working in VR or installation. I'm still relying on the skills that I gained and that I'm constantly trying to renew and rebuild or expand. But it's still that filmmaking practice that I go back to.
But you have a background in dance practice as well, don't you?
Yeah. I was working as an independent dancer, and then in my sort of late 20s, I started studying at the contemporary dance program at Concordia University in Montreal. But I was always really drawn to film. So I started, there's a very strong choreographic and creation aspect to the contemporary dance program at Concordia. So we're really encouraged to create work, explore ways to express ourselves and ideas through dance, less as a performance. It's not like dancers aren't coming out of the program, it's more creators are coming out of the program. Okay. So I just started looking to film as my platform to create dance in and on. Yeah. So I started studying film because there's a fabulous film program at Concordia as well. So the two kind of spoke to each other really nicely. Mm-hmm. I don't think I was so aware of dance film as a practice yet. I had seen films that really inspired me, but they weren't necessarily dance films. They might have been, I always go back to the Chantal Ackerman film on Pina Bausch, whose work I adored in the early 90s. So that film really spoke to me. And then just a lot of films where the body was present, and not necessarily speaking, but just what people were doing together, how they were framed, what they were expressing really, really inspired me a lot. And in Montreal, people were starting to do some really nice dance film work, early 90s as well.
So were you you were working with other film students while you were training at the college then? So you were actually collaborating as you were training as a dancer already with filmmakers, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So before I switched to the film program, I was doing both degrees simultaneously for a while. The dance program was open to me working as long as I could do both. It was demanding, of course, but yeah, it was kind of crazy. But even when I was in my first year in contemporary dance, I met a film student in a scenography set design class we were taking together. We were the only two that weren't from the theater department. I was from dance, he was from film, and his first Super 8 film I performed in, and I'd already started collaborating with film students, and they were coming to the dance department looking for people to perform in films, ideas they had, and they wanted to explore. So I sort of was already starting to work in it. But I really didn't understand what the filmmaking process was. I really had never thought of editing. I ended up becoming an editor, but I will sort of mention, when I applied for the film program, they had this summer program that was open to fine arts students that weren't in film. So I took one of my dance projects that I'd completely shot on film, but I'd used the monitor as my reference, and I was performing in it. And so it was how I entered the frame. My choreography and performance was totally informed by the frame itself. But I didn't think to stop the camera and start it again, or if I did, it was in-camera editing, but I didn't even know that was a term at the time. So they were actually kind of impressed that I had chosen to do this unedited one-take film. Yeah, so I was yeah, sure, that was completely my intention.
I did it on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so all of those things were more intuitive initially, and then as I started learning the craft, I was just really also taken by the parallels between choreography and filmmaking, how we create scenes, how we, at the time in dance, the choreographers I was working with and a lot of the work I was doing was based on tableaus, So we were creating scenes and then figuring out how to put them together, much as I would then do in filmmaking. And that choice of, going in and improvising forever and then drawing phrases from that improvisation that would become the dance work, I also felt had a lot of parallels to filmmaking, where you do a lot of exploration and then you really hone down and or hone in on specific ideas that you then craft and build into your phrase. And that whole idea too of creating something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. When we do choreography, it also has to start somewhere and end somewhere. Much as a film structure does. And of course the rhythm and pacing and just choices that you make are very similar.
Do you think that the creative process or those choices that you make change when it comes to working with film in comparison to now the digital non-linear way that we are used to doing now? Because I've never actually had the honor of working with film yet. And James, I know you've started building some film. What were you building the other day? You said you bought some stuff.
Oh yeah. No, I've started messing around with some Super 8 and Straight 8 film now. So yeah, that's been really fun because I obviously come up on digital and I learned on digital, and now I'm kind of going back the other way and trying to teach myself analog, which is really fun. So yeah. Yeah.
So I was just wondering if there's any changes in your process in working for one or the other, or does it not change at all, do you think, in the creative stuff?
Yeah, well, it's just that you have that physical connection to an object when you're working in film, and because it's so kind of fragile and you have to, pull your film and cut it, you start understanding time and rhythm, and you make choices, I find, in a more thoughtful way because it's so labor intensive. So you really think, what is, 48 frames going to give me of this shot, and you cut it in, and you have to like, physically cut it, tape it, splice it, play it back. Then you're like, not quite right. Then you have to go and find those 2 frames that you might have dropped on the floor, or, to get that extra little bit in there. And of course, working with sound has its own complexity, but it really, really, really trains you to be organized, to know your material, how to find it, what it is. You look at it a lot more, I find, than I tend to now with digital. Like you can film a lot, have long shooting days, but whereas I would always be looking at my dailies or my rushes, or even just once I got all the film back before I edited, I did a lot of reviewing of the material before I actually started physically cutting it. So that's a difference. And, just the film practice too of shooting analog. Now you can't have video playback when you're shooting, but, back in the day we had to predetermine so many things, and even using a light meter allowed you to become so aware of where the light was falling, like you'd have your light meter here versus the other side of your face, which was in shadow perhaps, so you really understood how light was affecting the body if you're, say, working with dance and a dancer or dancers. So, it was always that care again, like you're putting that film through the camera. You're not going to see it until it's been sent to the lab, processed, a work print has been made and is sent back to you. So it was lighting, focal length, focus was a big one too. We'd actually be measuring with a tape the distance between the lens, not even the lens, like the plate where the image was being captured, and the subject to make sure we had the focus where we wanted it. And, we had all these like little books we would check in with for our f-stops and if we wanted it. I was really always into working with the texture and quality of film too, so I was always wanting to really push the grain. So it was like, how do you get that? Because you'd have to get it when you're filming. It was really hard to create that afterwards. So it would be like you have a certain ASA on your film, and then you'd be pushing it a stop or two to just add to that texture. And speed was a thing too that we'd often predetermine, unless we were going to go into optical printing afterwards, which I did explore quite a bit in my practice. But yeah, you'd have to crank the camera to film more frames if you wanted it slow, less frames if you wanted it fast. So there was a lot to consider on set and then in the edit room with working on the flatbed.
Yeah, I've become more and more fascinated with it, and knowing that James is now wanting to play with it as well, I really feel like it could help to make me a better filmmaker by playing with analog in that respect. Because I grew up in a very much fix it in post age mentality. Like when you start off making film in the digital world, it's like, don't worry, we'll fix it in post. And then you start to realize as you're going through that is that the more you can get correct before anything even happens, before you even press record, the more you can get correct in front of the camera, the easier
better.
Post-production things come, I guess, in the end. But yeah, that's me speaking coming from a dance practice. It took me a while to work that out. And perhaps if now I want to go backwards and know where I'm coming from to know where I'm going in the film more so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just allows you to explore more qualities. And I love the fact that a lot of young media artists or younger media artists are really into analog now. I'm a member at a film co-op, and we have like all the latest new technology, but we also have the film cameras. And I've given quite a few workshops using Super 8. And people are really like, what do you mean I can't play it back? And what do you mean I only have 4 minutes? And one of the challenges I give them is you're only going to have 3 rolls of film, so you've got like 9 minutes. So you're going to tell a 5-minute story that you have to predetermine. There's no sync sound, so how are you going to deal with sound? So all of these things have to be considered before, and they love it, And even if everything's like totally overexposed or underexposed, we have the screenings, and people are just, I don't know, it's a wonderful practice. I encourage anybody to explore it.
I think it's a really good practice for directors to work with film, I think the way that a lot of directors that I work with now who've come up with me through digital and have never played with film, I think the understanding of the collaboration is very different. When you work on digital, they can see things instantly, they can test things, they can kind of play around, they can overshoot. There is a lot less of the pre-production, a lot less importance put on the pre-production, because they're much more inclined to find things on the day and experiment on the day. Whereas with film, they don't have the luxury of being able to do that. They can test to a certain extent, but a lot of it comes down to really understanding the collaboration with the DP and the trusting that the DP is going to be able to explain to them how certain things are going to look and how things are going to feel and how their ideas are going to translate, and then trusting that that person can then execute that, and that their focus is really going to be on all of the nuances of putting the story together. Whereas I think some of that is lost in digital because people get so transfixed looking at a monitor. So that's been a really interesting thing when I start looking at working with film. Just that process and that collaboration becomes very different, and the role of the director, I feel, shift very quickly as soon as film comes into play.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I still really encourage emerging filmmakers to think about all that time you have before you go into production, the pre-production, the writing. We're all visual people. We can imagine the film we want to make. Like, we have so much time to create the treatment before, and my big thing is the more prepared you are going into production, the more time you will have to find some time to explore or get something new than just sort of getting there and making it up on the spot. If you get there with a plan, you get the plan done, and while you're there you might be seeing things that you couldn't anticipate without being there, and then you have the time and the ability to bring that in, but it doesn't become the first. You've got your base that you've already planned out, and I think it's always really good to follow through on your idea, like really develop it, but then follow through. It might not always be successful. I look back at the films I've made, and they haven't all turned out to be what I thought they would. Some are more, some are less, but I think that's, as artists, we have to push an idea through from the inspiration through all the stages of development, research, writing, production, post-production, and take that chance,
Right.
And
would you mind expanding on that a little bit? I'd be really keen to hear what ideas you had that you kind of executed and then were like, that wasn't really what I planned.
Well, I'd have to start digging a little bit. Sometimes it came down to the ideas were just too ambitious for sort of the feasibility side. You might go in, you've given yourself a full day to shoot something, and then try as you may, it just takes way too long to set everything up, and you don't really have enough time to shoot. You feel like you've just kind of warmed up, and then you have to get out. You're kicked off location. You can't stay. Mm-hmm. So I feel there's been a couple of those times where it was just like, felt like we were just getting going, even though we had a plan. It was really late in executing it, and then it was over. So we had to work with what we had, and we did create something. And even if it turned out to be something that had some impact, the experience of having made it still resides with me. So I still feel quite unsatisfied with the production because of that. Right. I guess the same way, sometimes just because you had such a wonderful experience creating something, that as the creator sort of still lives on with the film too. So that's the other thing too, as much as you plan out your idea, it's the producer side or the practical side of you that has to anticipate the time it's going to take. If you've got like a really complex lighting setup and you've got huge windows that you've got to filter out, well, how long is that really going to take to do? And how long is it really going to take to hang the lights and get everything right? So, those are things we learn as we go.
Absolutely. Do you actually know how many films you've made? Like, have you been keeping count? Because I know you've been working within the Screendance space for 3 decades, a little bit more. And that to us is just so like exciting because we're very much at the beginning of our journey. So how do you know how many films you've made to date?
Well, I know, not really, because some, collaborations or commissions or contracts kind of fall by the wayside, or you kind of forget about them. But one thing that I don't know if this even fits into the Screendance definition, but Philip Szporer and I, we have a company together, Mouvement Perpétuel, and we've done a lot of dance films. But we've also done 9 or 10 documentaries. Yeah, and they're all, most of them are either portraits of choreographers or looking at the creative process in dance, or the intersection of dance and music, collaborations with people. But they also play on other themes as well. And I realized, because I did have a look at that today, and I don't think they really played in Screendance festivals. They played in documentary film festivals, they played in art film festivals. They kind of took the distribution route of what the issues were that were explored in the documentary. So I spent a lot of time with Byron Chief Moon, Grey Horse Rider, on the LGBTQ festival circuit, and on the Indigenous film festival circuit. And art films, but I can't say it ever played at a dance film festival. It also has to do, I imagine, with the length. A lot of them are like hour-long documentaries. The shorter ones have been at Screendance and maybe a couple of other Screendance festivals. But, does it fit in Screendance, or is it purely a documentary on dance? I mean, we always try to incorporate our approach to filming dance in the documentaries. In Byron Chief Moon, we shot a lot on film, and we played with, film speed, trying to emulate his connection to the land that he's from, his his ancestral land that really speaks a lot to him and to his practice. But, so I know how many documentaries we've made.
How many documentaries have you made then?
9.
9, okay.
Yeah, and then again with Mouvement Perpétuel, Philip and I were really able to tap into, or we were lucky, successful. Of course, not every idea we put forth was funded, but when we had the Bravo Fax support system in Canada in the late 90s, early 2000s, I guess, they were really supporting dance on screen for broadcast. So they would invest in half of your production budget, and I mean, you would keep the rights to the film, but it would be played on their platforms or on their channel.
That's amazing.
Yeah, where did that go? So much of that was happening here in the UK as well with the BBC, and they were funding so many screen. What happened to the broadcast funding? We got to contact them directly now and put the films in their face, I think.
Exactly, and Bravo Fact, I think, was very inspired by the BBC and what was going on in UK and in Europe. Where they were really matching or bringing together, inviting filmmakers and choreographers to collaborate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, even on Netflix now, they released what was it, Tom York?
Yeah, Tom York's.
The Tom York piece, and what did they label it as? I can't remember.
They called it some kind of music video. They said it was like a dance,
music, art film,
but they
thing.
put it in the category of music video, which was so interesting because, yeah.
And I was like, they don't even know they're releasing Screendance onto their. Someone needs to tell them.
They should start a silent film category, I think.
Oh, that's a good idea.
All of that stuff could play in really well, and their whole ethos of multi-language, multicultural distribution. They should start a silent Netflix if you're listening. Do it.
Yeah.
So exactly. Do you feel like sometimes we're kind of working and living in this bubble that is the Screendance world?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I always have to introduce outside networks to what it is. And say there's a place, guys, that we can come and get involved with, but then people are doing it anyway, but within their
own bubbles,
their own those bubbles as well. Yeah,
we were having this conversation because sometimes you see a piece of dance film or a screen dance work, but it's not something that you see on the screen dance circuit. It's something that we saw on television or on the film festival circuit or in a very specific category, So it's really interesting because we have a couple friends that are making dance film now, but they're doing it, via a very different way. They're doing it because they come from an acting background or,
Yeah, so they get funding from theatre companies and other things like that to
they're just
facilitate
approaching
their
it
work,
from like a
right?
different angle, and it's really interesting to see how they're being successful, but in like a different pool of work compared to
But
what we're
it's
working
so funny
within right
because
now.
just as like what Marlene was saying, where putting your films into all of their shareholders' places, like looking at the documentary, what is it themed about? Let's put it into that sort of space.
Right.
And all screen dancers, I feel, work like that in some way. We can't just make money off of being within the screen dance industry. We have to look at all of these other things that are interconnected with our hybridity.
Yeah.
But it's so funny that we don't do it as much within our hub, and I don't know whether that's because we want to protect it and it's so nice to have this little family kind of I don't know if it's little, but in the big scheme of things,
Ever expanding.
ever
Yes.
expanding. Exactly. Ever expanding. But I think it's changing now. I think it's definitely changing now, and it has risen to another peak that was like in the 1990s when there was that. It kind of comes in waves,
Coming back
hasn't it?
around again, I think.
So I feel like we're at I don't know whether it's a good or bad thing, but we're at a place to now start to bring everybody together a bit more, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't able to join in on all of the conversations at Screendance Scotland last week, but I know there was one about like social issues and
Activism,
activism, and I think that's what people need to do with their films is look at what they're about. Everything's about something, and
Really?
whenever I'm drawn to work with a choreographer or adapt an existing work, I'm always drawn to something that interests me, even if it's not obvious, even if it's quite abstract in how they've brought it to life. I'm always intrigued at what the story is behind it or underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can bring that out, even in how we package the film or describe it or promote it, I think there are other, if you want to call them markets, other avenues that we can pursue to try and get our work out in different places. We do quite a bit of work in distribution with universities, colleges, schools, and quite often, again, they'll be directed towards a department that might be, it's not dance necessarily. Sometimes it's media arts, sometimes it's gender studies, sometimes it's the music department, interdisciplinary. So it's always to kind of look at where we can connect our work with other audiences. And it's a way to have your films kind of live on and connect with other audiences, and hopefully you get some conversation back from these other fields. Because I do find our conversations within the screen dance world tend to evolve around similar topics.
Right.
And it's
Absolutely.
yeah.
So
I totally encourage you all to really look at how you
explore those
distribute your
different
film. And I know one of the questions you had was, why don't I put our work?
That's what I was just going to ask you. Yeah, because
I literally just highlighted it now. I was like, okay, we're going to ask this one next.
I
It's
went
time for this
on your
one.
website recently just to sort of like, refresh all your recent projects and see if I could, watch some more of your work, and it just reminded me that you don't release or distribute necessarily a lot of your work online. We only get the blessing of seeing it in film festivals. So why, can you talk about that choice?
Yeah, well, I've always seen a distribution as part of the whole filmmaking process. So, and this, it is evolving for sure, and it's something that in the filmmaking world we've had to deal with a lot over the last, I'd say, almost 10 years. Because before, when you were, creating your financial structure for your film, a lot depended on where it was going to end up.
Right.
Because to finish a film and sell it, you say you'll get a few $100s as an acquisition, but if you can get an investor interested when you're creating the film, especially like a broadcaster or whatever platform is replacing that, you can have a licensing agreement, which has a far greater value than finishing your film and selling it for a few $100.
Mm-hmm.
So, back in the BravoFact days and broadcast days, we really worked with producers at the different channels as partners in the financing of our films. So while we always had held ownership over the productions, they would say we'd have an agreement with them that they would have the first window to show it for a year, and then we could go to others. But if it's online, it's available to everyone.
Yeah.
So there's no reason that they would even need to invest in it because anybody could see it anyhow.
Right.
And the same with our educational distribution. If our films are just out there, they're not going to be shown in the same way as when they're part of a library collection.
Exactly.
So it often comes back to that, like how we've decided to like build the financial structure for our productions, and it really does go right through to distribution, because as much as we can raise and invest in a production, things always go over budget.
Yes.
Even modestly so we're always dependent on that distribution stream as well. And applying for funding too, people always want to know what your distribution plan is.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're being encouraged to work with distributors now when applying for funding here in Quebec anyways, through our Arts Council. So they're recognizing all the work that we put into getting our films out there and the thousands of dollars we pay entering film festivals, right?
Yeah.
And the time and the energy that goes into that. So, there is a recognition of that now, and we can apply for a certain degree of funding to help us develop relationships with established distributors, especially trying to tap into like this new world of digital platform as a form of distribution.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Because obviously we met you on the festival circuit. We met you at Screendance in Amsterdam. And we know that you love to visit a lot of the festivals that you're screening some of your films at.
Yeah, us too.
So can you talk about how important it is for you to attend film festivals that your work is being screened at?
That my work is being screened at or not. I think it's really wonderful to be at festivals, to see the films that were created for a large screen to be presented on a large screen, and to meet the artists who might be there to discuss, their journey, their choices, where they're at. It's like our chance it's like a critical mass that comes together at these select moments. So all of that I think is really important. So whenever I can, I love to be there. And if it's to present a work that I've directed or co-directed, that's even more exciting, because you do get that immediate reaction from the audience.
Mm-hmm. We love the conversation, and exactly what you were saying, just being able to connect with other artists and have those really interesting creative conversations about their work or the work that we've just witnessed. That's what makes it special. And that's one of the reasons Screen.Dance was so special last year, when we were able to connect in person, because there was just so many people there that were open to having those more sort of in-depth, nuanced conversations about what we're making and why.
Yeah, and I asked some hard questions as well, didn't I?
Yeah.
And it can spark new ideas, new collaborations. I met so many people that I've ended up working with.
Oh, amazing.
Like Jukka from Malakta in Finland.
Okay.
I've taught 2 filmmaking workshops, Screendance workshops there. I did a residency there. We've met in New York. And that was meeting at, we met in Helsinki. And the only reason I ended up in Helsinki is because I was at Screendance. And I met Hannah and catchy, and they're like, "Oh, you submitted 6 films to our festival. We could only pick one, but if you want to come and give a presentation, you know." So I went and gave a presentation. I met Yuka, and there was chain reaction with that. And then I think at another cine dance festival, I met Anna Alexandre. And I hadn't been aware of her festival. We submitted Les Milo. It won the jury prize. We went back to do a residency, which was the prize. And then we ended up making Traverse there, you know?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So I've been to many festivals. Things like this haven't happened, but it's like a beautiful, fertile ground to meet people and discuss new ideas and potential partnerships. So it's been wonderful.
As a screen dance filmmaker, I've also found that, you know, the second half of my journey has been learning film. And now, you know, I edit, I enjoy directing. You gave me the opportunity of first assistant directing, which is a whole different ball game to just working in the sometimes you're doing that, all of those roles at one time sometimes.
Yeah.
So I just wondered if you particularly had a favorite of the roles that you do, because I know on your website it says film editor, but you've directed and you've produced the Tentacle Tribe piece, and so lots of different roles have come into that. I wonder if you had a favorite place to be.
Well, I think, you know, I like being there for the whole duration, you know, from the inception to the conclusion. So whatever roles I need to take on to get something from that spark realized right through to out in the world, I'm happy to do all of those roles. Of course, I suppose, like, what is the most challenging would be the producer role and just sticking with it. And I'm really fortunate with the 2 companies I have to have partners to share this journey and all the rejection and celebrate the successes with. So Philip Szporer and I with Mouvement Perpétuel, and now Sandy Silva and I have formed a company, the Migration Dance Film Project. So yeah, both companies were always just looking how to get these projects off the ground. So there's the writing, the waiting, the rejection,
Yeah.
and then putting it out again, and how can we say that again, but, you know, really convince people this is important or you know, worthwhile or artistically worth exploring. So that's difficult, but it's also wonderful when we are able to move forward with ideas. But I really enjoy directing the most. I love editing, but I kind of prefer editing almost other people's work, or if it's a very personal work. But if it's a collaborative work, I prefer being able to sit back and, you know, bring my experience as an editor and a filmmaker to the cut, but not to be the person doing it. I just find it's sort of, there's a little bit of conflict for myself there.
Yeah.
So yeah, writing, directing is the most exciting part of it all, for sure.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And obviously you're just mentioning some of the collaborations that you have in your work. And you have you have multiple, as you said, you've got so many meaningful and powerful collaborations in your creative career. What would be your advice to someone who is looking to find those sort of creative partnerships, but also partnerships that will last? Because I know that many of your collaborators, you've worked with them now for quite some time, and that's so special. I think that's something that as creatives that we seek out, you know, we yearn for. So do you have any advice for someone that's looking for that and sort of how to get there or how to start?
I mean, while Philip and I have been collaborating for 20 years, I also have other people I've been working with since I was in film school, you know, certain DPs, certain editors who are filmmakers in their own right. But I mean, a lot of it is personality. You have to be able to, you know, get along with somebody for sure, and just have that openness and see the potential of having a collaborator. You know, it's wonderful because, like Philip and I, like, we really inspire each other, you know, and we trust each other, and we question what we're doing a lot. And I find when you're on your own, often you can, even if you've got some questions about what you're doing, you can kind of put it aside. But when you have somebody else there with you, it's kind of like watching your film with an audience for the first time. You know, certain things that you might have been skeptical about are just like up there in front of you, and you're like, why did I do that? Why didn't I listen to that little voice in my head? So anyway, so having somebody there allows you to exchange, and I think that's one of the most valuable things. And as I was saying before, just to share that load of work that it is, getting a production off the ground and seeing it through. I have other colleagues that are working very independently, and you know, they really kind of look at what we've got with a lot of admiration, because like, you guys are just so lucky you get to share this, you know, both the positive and the negative side of things. So it's just, you know, have to somebody that you share an artistic vision with, but you're willing to challenge it, to challenge your own vision and theirs, and have conversation. And you know, sometimes there'll be an idea that one of us have and the other one's lukewarm, so either put it aside or that person runs with it and develops it on their own. And if it's an idea of Philip's, I'm there to support what he's off doing, and likewise, and we have the company as a base to do that. The collaboration with Sandy Silva as a choreographer is different, because it's filmmaker and choreographer, but the fact that we're both like so invested in it as producers, we really share every aspect of both the choreographic creation and the filmmaking side of things. Like, it's a constant conversation, and one is always affecting the other.
Amazing.
Yeah. So again, that's super rewarding, and we get to, you know, travel together and come up with new ideas and crazy places and try and see them through.
Yeah,
Well,
and it's not usual in. Would you say that's a usual relationship to happen as well? I found that so fascinating, because I've not always experienced it, but there has been talks of tension between directors and the choreographers within the dance film space in some respects. And the way that you guys worked together was just so in sync, always asking questions. It like never stopped, and then answering each other's questions at the same time sometimes. It was just like you guys have such a chemistry that was just so
inspiring,
wonderful to see. Yeah, exactly. Like, you, when Sandy could watch the monitor, she was there by the monitor by your side as much as she was on screen. It was just really cool to see that happen. That wasn't really a question. It was just a straight up observation of wonderfulness. But I don't know if you've experienced that tension in the past when you've directed other works, and perhaps the choreographer's input. Has there been anything like that with you in the past, or has it always been a nice collaboration, I guess?
Yeah, well, we've always tried to be really clear, you know, from the get-go. So we've done a lot of one-offs with choreographers, and it's not that we don't want to work with them again, but it was like that piece of work spoke to us. And very often, say with Philip and I, the shorts that we've done, one of us has seen a work, or we've seen a work together, and we're like, that would translate so beautifully to the screen. And we've approached the choreographer saying, we'd like to make a film based on your work. And they've collaborated with us to varying degrees, but often we've really presented it as, we'd like to adapt your work to film. And the understanding is that that's our artistic vision. And they're definitely involved in the production, but we've predetermined how we want it to be created. And nobody has ever been unhappy with the results at all. Like, it's always been a really, really nice collaboration in that way. And then other artists have been more involved, like Shantala Shivalingappa with Bhairava. She was very involved in like, she was just so interested, much like Sandy Silva has been with the work, you know, in understanding what each shot was going to be, and being able to take the phrase of movement that was planned and really understand how that was going to be affected by the composition and the physical space she'd be performing in. She was involved in the editing too. I had the chance to spend some time with her in Paris. Because for me, it was it's not a form of dance, the kuchipudi, that I understand as well as I understand contemporary dance, or now how I understand percussive dance. So I was really concerned about how it would be cut, and the timing especially. It's so complex, right, with the rhythm structures and whatnot. So I really wanted to, Philip and I really wanted to have her input on that, and I was lucky enough to be in France, so we spent a few days going over the edit together. And I'm sure she was open to it being much more experimental in its approach than it was.
Right.
But we are predetermined, and we decided to follow through the idea of creating the film like that. We would follow from the beginning to the end her choreographic structure. Often, especially with a lot of contemporary dance work that we've adapted to the screen, like we completely basically re-choreographed the work in the editing. But with Chantal's piece Spirova, we really wanted to stick to the arc that was inherent in her stage work. We were even influenced by some of her lighting choices from the stage work that we had seen to inform even though we were working outside with natural lighting, we used the idea of silhouette that she had in her stage work. So it was really interesting to be so influenced by.
Yeah, I had no idea that it was influenced by the stage work. That's so interesting to hear.
Yeah, and even in the stage work, it's only at, 3 minutes in that her face is revealed. And we follow that in the way we chose to work with light in the stage work as well, and in the screen work as well. So again, that was like, and with Crystal Pite, she was also very involved in, she co-directed Lost Action Trace with us, which was to be a much longer work, but it ended up being the 2-minute piece that the National Film Board produced. So again, she choreographed it for 2 minutes of film. She basically took a 58-minute piece and was able to take the essence of it and bring it down to 2 minutes. So again, she was working, we were in studio with her, we were working on the storyboards together, we did the shot list, but it was all based on the ideas that we had agreed upon together with her.
You have been listening to the MDC Talks. That has been episode 1 of Marlene Millar's podcast. Check out episode 2, where we'll be delving deeper into the Migrations Dance Film Project and our recent collaboration, Navigation.